They say a duke never kneels. But Adrian Blackthorne stood in the center of his own ballroom that night, surrounded by 300 aristocrats who had once bowed to his name and felt the weight of their collective contempt pressing down on his shoulders like iron chains. The chandeliers burned too bright, the music had stopped, and in the terrible silence that followed, he understood with perfect clarity that reputation was not armor, it was a noose, and someone had just kicked the chair out from under him. This is the story of how a marriage built on silence nearly collapsed under the weight of a single piece of silk. It's about the lies we tell to protect the people we love, and the truth that always finds its way into the light, no matter how deep we bury it. Stay until the end, because what begins as betrayal becomes something far more dangerous. Redemption. Boss. The rain came down in sheets that evening, turning the cobblestones outside Blackthorne Manor into black mirrors that reflected nothing but darkness. Lady Evelyn Hartwell stood at the window of her dressing room, watching the storm devour London, and felt the familiar ache of loneliness settle into her bones like an old friend she had learned to tolerate. 4 years of marriage had taught her many things: how to smile when she felt hollow, how to arrange flowers for a dining table that seated 20 but fed only 2, how to sleep beside a man whose body was warm but whose heart remained locked behind walls she could neither scale nor breach. She pressed her palm against the cold glass. Downstairs, Adrian was preparing for the Kensington banquet, the social event of the season, where every duke, duchess, and social climber in England would gather to see and be seen. He would need his formal coat, the black one with the silver buttons, tailored perfectly to his frame, the one that made him look like what he was, untouchable. Evelyn turned from his window and crossed to the mahogany wardrobe where his evening clothes hung in neat rows. She pulled the coat free, feeling the weight of the fabric, the quality of the wool. Everything Adrian owned was like this: expensive, impeccable, cold. She laid it across the bed and smoothed the lapels, preparing to carry it down to him. But as her hand passed over the right pocket, she felt something, a small bulge, barely noticeable. Her fingers paused. Adrian was meticulous. He never left anything in his pockets. She told herself to ignore it, to respect his privacy, to be the dutiful wife she had been trained to become. But her hand was already reaching inside. The silk was impossibly soft against her fingertips, smoother than anything she owned. She pulled it free and held it up to the lamplight. A woman's handkerchief, cream-colored, edged with delicate lace. The kind of thing that costs more than most servants earned in a month. And there, embroidered in gold thread so fine it looked like captured sunlight, was a name. Celine. Evelyn stared at the letters. Her heart, which had been beating steadily just moments before, now hammered against her ribs like something caged and desperate. She lifted the handkerchief to her nose. The scent hit her immediately: jasmine and amber, foreign and intimate, the kind of perfume that clung to skin after long hours in close quarters. Not her perfume, someone else's. The door opened behind her. She spun around, the handkerchief still clutched in her hand, and found Adrian standing in the doorway. He had changed into his shirt and waistcoat, but hadn't yet put on his coat. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and for a moment he looked almost human, almost vulnerable. Then his eyes dropped to the silk in her hand, and his entire face went rigid. It wasn't anger she saw there. It was fear. Raw, animal fear. The kind that made her stomach turn because she had never, not once in 4 years, seen her husband afraid of anything. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. "Adrian," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is this?" He didn't move, didn't speak. His jaw worked, but no words came out. She watched the muscles in his throat contract as he swallowed, watched his hands curl into fists at his sides. "Adrian," she said again, louder this time. "Whose name is this?" "It's nothing," he said finally, but his voice was wrong, tight, strained, like a rope about to snap. "Give it to me." She took a step back, clutching the handkerchief tighter. "Nothing. You expect me to believe this is nothing?" He moved toward her, one slow step. "Evelyn, please." She had never heard him say please before. Not to her. Not to anyone. The word sounded foreign in his mouth, desperate and ugly, and it made something inside her chest crack wide open. "Who is Celine?" she said, and this time it wasn't a question. It was a demand. Adrian stopped. His hands were shaking. She could see them trembling at his sides, and the sight of it terrified her more than anything else because Adrian Blackthorne did not shake. He did not falter. He was stone and ice and iron, and now he stood before her looking like a man who had just been gutted. "I can't," he said hoarsely. "I can't tell you." The words hit her like a slap. "Can't," she repeated, "or won't." His eyes met hers, and in them she saw something she had never seen before. Not coldness, not indifference, but pain. Deep, old pain, the kind that had been festering for years in the dark. "Evelyn," he said softly, "if you love me at all, you will let this go." The plea in his voice nearly undid her, but the handkerchief in her hand was real. The perfume was real. The name embroidered in gold was real. And she had spent 4 years living inside a marriage that felt like a beautiful mausoleum, perfect and pristine and utterly devoid of life. "I don't think I do," she said, and her voice came out flat and cold. "Love you. I don't think I ever did." She saw the words land, saw him flinch as if she had struck him. Good. Let him hurt. Let him feel what she had felt every night lying beside him, wondering if he even remembered she was there. Adrian opened his mouth, closed it again. Then he turned without another word and walked out of the room, leaving her standing alone with the handkerchief and the sound of rain hammering against the windows. The Kensington banquet was held at the Duke of Pembroke's estate, a massive Georgian manor that glittered like a jewel box in the heart of London. Carriages lined the circular drive, disgorging men in black tailcoats and women draped in silk and diamonds. The air smelled of expensive perfume, cigar smoke, and ambition. Evelyn sat in their carriage, watching Adrian's profile in the dim light. He hadn't spoken to her since the incident in the bedroom. Not during the ride. Not when the footman opened the door and offered his hand to help her down. He simply walked beside her toward the entrance, his face a mask of perfect composure, as if nothing had happened at all. She hated him for it, hated how easily he could bury everything, how he could stand there looking like the most powerful man in England while she felt like she was drowning. Inside, the ballroom was a sea of color and light. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting prismatic rainbows across the marble floor. An orchestra played Mozart in the corner. Waiters circulated with champagne and canapes. Everyone was smiling, laughing, performing the intricate social dance they had all been bred for. Evelyn moved through it mechanically, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, pretending her world hadn't just tilted on its axis. Lady Pembroke complimented her gown. Lord Ashford asked about Adrian's investments in the railway. Someone mentioned the weather, and she nodded and smiled and said all the right things while her mind screamed. Celine. 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 She watched Adrian across the room, surrounded by men in expensive suits, discussing politics and business with the easy confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. He caught her eye once, just for a moment, and she saw something flicker there. Regret, maybe, or guilt. But then someone asked him a question, and he turned away, and the moment was gone. "You look pale, darling." Evelyn turned to find Beatrice Ashford standing beside her, a champagne flute in one hand and a knowing smile on her painted lips. Beatrice was her closest friend in London society, though friend was perhaps too strong a word. Ally. Confidant. The woman you told secrets to because she already knew them anyway. "I'm fine," Evelyn said automatically. Beatrice studied her with sharp, intelligent eyes. "No, you're not. What's wrong?" "Nothing. Liar." Beatrice leaned in closer, lowering her voice. "Is it Adrian?" Evelyn's throat tightened. "I don't want to talk about it." "Then it is Adrian." Beatrice glanced across the room to where the Duke stood, then back to Evelyn. "What did he do?" The question was so direct, so brutally simple that Evelyn almost laughed. What did he do? What didn't he do? 4 years of silence. 4 years of distance. 4 years of being married to a ghost. "I found something," she said quietly. "In his coat pocket." Beatrice's eyes widened slightly. Something? Or someone? Evelyn didn't answer, but her silence was answer enough. Beatrice exhaled slowly. "Oh, darling, I'm so sorry." "Don't be," Evelyn said, surprised by the bitterness in her own voice. "I always knew, didn't I? That's what everyone said when we got engaged. Poor Evelyn, marrying the coldest man in England. Poor Evelyn spending her life in a gilded cage. You don't know that he's a handkerchief, Evelyn interrupted, with another woman's name embroidered on it, reeking of perfume. What else could it be? Beatrice said nothing for a long moment, then, "What will you do?" Evelyn looked across the room at her husband. He was laughing at something Lord Pembroke had said, his head thrown back, his teeth white in the chandelier light. He looked happy, carefree. Nothing like the man who had stood in their bedroom 2 hours ago, trembling with fear. "I don't know," she admitted. The evening dragged on. Dinner was served in the grand dining hall, 12 courses, each more elaborate than the last. Evelyn sat beside Adrian, their shoulders nearly touching, an ocean between them. He cut his meat with surgical precision, chewed slowly, drank his wine in measured sips, every movement controlled, calculated, perfect. She wanted to scream. After dinner, the guests moved to the drawing room for brandy and cigars. Evelyn excused herself, claiming a headache, and slipped away down a quiet corridor lined with portraits of dead Pembrokes. She needed air, needed to think, needed to— Lady Blackthorne. She froze. The voice came from behind her, low and cultured, with an edge she couldn't quite place. She turned slowly. The woman standing in the shadows was perhaps 30, elegant and severe in a gown of midnight blue. Her hair was dark, pulled back from a face that might have been beautiful, if not for the hardness in her eyes. She held a glass of wine loosely in one hand, and when she stepped into the light, Evelyn saw the glint of gold at her throat. A locket, ornate and expensive. "I don't believe we've been introduced," Evelyn said carefully. The woman smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "No, we haven't. But I know who you are. Everyone does. The Ice Queen, the perfect Duchess, the woman who stands beside the great Adrian Blackthorne and never asks questions." Evelyn's spine stiffened. "I'm sorry. Who are you?" The woman took a sip of wine, her eyes never leaving Evelyn's face. "My name is Celine Ashcroft." The world tilted. Evelyn stared at her, at this woman whose name had been embroidered in gold on silk that smelled of jasmine and secrets. She was real, standing here, flesh and blood, not some phantom conjured by Evelyn's imagination. "I see he hasn't told you about me," Celine said softly. "How typical." Adrian always did prefer silence to honesty. "What do you want?" Evelyn managed, her voice barely steady. Celine studied her for a long moment, something like pity crossing her face. "I want you to know the truth. About your husband. About the man you married. Then tell me." Celine shook her head. "No, that's not how this works. You'll have to discover it yourself. But I'll give you a hint, Lady Blackthorne." She stepped closer, close enough that Evelyn could smell her perfume, jasmine and amber, just like the handkerchief. "Ask him about my husband. Ask him about Thomas. Ask him why a good man is dead and a monster wears a crown." Before Evelyn could respond, Celine turned and walked away, disappearing back into the shadows of the corridor, leaving nothing behind but the echo of her footsteps and the scent of jasmine in the air. Evelyn found Adrian in the library, alone. He stood at the window, staring out at the rain-soaked gardens, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He didn't turn when she entered, but she saw his shoulders tense. "I met her," Evelyn said. Adrian's hand tightened around the glass. "Who?" "Celine Ashcroft." She stopped in the middle of the room, her heart pounding. "She told me to ask you about her husband, about someone named Thomas." Adrian's entire body went rigid. When he finally turned to face her, his expression was carefully blank, but his eyes— God, his eyes looked haunted. "You shouldn't have spoken to her," he said quietly. "Why not?" "Because she knows the truth. Because she knows who you really are." "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." Evelyn took a step toward him. 4 years, Adrian. 4 years I've been your wife, and I know nothing about you, nothing that matters. You keep me at arm's length, you lock yourself away in your study for days at a time, and now I find out there's another woman." "She's not my lover," Adrian interrupted, his voice sharp. Evelyn stopped. "What?" He set down his glass with a heavy thud. "Celine Ashcroft is not my lover. She's not my mistress. She's not—" He broke off, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of pure frustration. She's my nightmare, my punishment, the ghost I can't escape. I don't understand. No. Adrian's voice was raw. You don't. And you never will, because I can't. He turned away, pressing his palms against the desk. I can't tell you. If I tell you, you'll hate me. You'll leave. And I... His voice cracked. I can't lose you too. The vulnerability in his voice shattered something inside her. She crossed the room and grabbed his arm, forcing him to turn and face her. 2. You said 2. Who else did you lose? Adrian looked down at her, and for the first time since she'd known him, she saw tears in his eyes. Real tears, threatening to spill over. My brother, he whispered. The words hung in the air between them. Your brother, Evelyn repeated. You don't have a brother. No. Adrian's smile was bitter, broken. Not anymore. I don't. Because I killed him. The confession hit her like a physical blow. She stepped back, her hand falling away from his arm. What are you talking about? 6 years ago, Adrian said, his voice hollow. My younger brother Edmund killed a man. Thomas Ashcroft, Celine's husband. It was an accident, a duel that went wrong, but the law didn't care. They were going to hang him. He was 20 years old, Evelyn. 20. And terrified. Adrian's hands were shaking again. I had money, power, connections. I could make it go away. So I did. I bribed judges, bought witnesses, buried evidence. I destroyed documents and ruined careers. I did everything I had to do to save Edmund's life. And, Evelyn whispered, and it worked. Adrian laughed, but the sound was ugly. The charges were dropped. Edmund was free. But the guilt. He pressed his fist against his chest. The guilt destroyed him. He couldn't live with what he'd done, what I'd done. 6 months later, he put a bullet in his head. Oh, God. Celine knows, Adrian continued. She's always known. And for 5 years, she's used that knowledge to torment me, threatening to expose what I did, threatening to destroy everything. The handkerchief. He gestured vaguely. She left it where she knew you'd find it. She wants to tear us apart. She wants me to suffer the way she suffered. Evelyn's mind reeled. Everything she'd thought she understood had just been upended. The affair that wasn't an affair. The betrayal that was actually guilt. The coldness that was grief. Why didn't you tell me? She said finally. Adrian looked at her with eyes full of pain. Because I didn't want you to see me as I really am. A man who breaks laws to save the people he loves. A man whose sins got his own brother killed. A monster who wears a duke's crown. The same words Celine had used. You're not a monster, Evelyn said softly. Aren't I? Adrian's voice was barely audible. I've done terrible things, Evelyn. Things that would make you hate me if you knew the full truth. Then tell me the full truth. He shook his head. I can't. Why not? Because... His voice broke completely. Because you're the only good thing left in my life. And if I lose you, I lose everything. Evelyn stood there, looking at this man she had married 4 years ago, this stranger she was only now beginning to know. She thought about the handkerchief, the fear in his eyes, the way he watched over her constantly, as if protecting her from something she couldn't see. Adrian, she said carefully, is Celine dangerous? He looked at her for a long moment. Then, yes, she is, but not in the way you think. What does that mean? Before he could answer, the library door burst open. Lord Cedric Vale stood in the doorway, his face flushed with excitement. Adrian, there you are. You need to come quickly. There's been... He stopped, noticing Evelyn. Oh, Lady Blackthorn, I didn't realize... What is it, Cedric? Adrian said sharply. It's Celine Ashcroft. She's in the ballroom. She's telling everyone. Cedric paused, looking uncomfortable. She's telling everyone about Thomas, about Edmund, about what you did. Adrian's face went white. Evelyn watched in horror as everything she'd just learned crystallized into sharp, terrible clarity. Celine hadn't wanted to tear them apart. She wanted to destroy Adrian completely, publicly, in front of the entire aristocracy. And she had just started. Adrian moved toward the door, but Evelyn grabbed his arm. Wait, don't go out there alone. He looked down at her, surprise flickering across his face. Evelyn, I'm your wife, she said firmly. Whatever happens, we face it together. Something shifted in his expression then, something like hope. Together, they walked back to the ballroom. But the scene that greeted them was chaos. 300 aristocrats stood in a circle around Celine Ashcroft, who had climbed onto a chair in the center of the room. Her voice rang out, clear and sharp as broken glass. And he bribed judges, destroyed evidence, allowed a murderer to walk free while my husband's body was still warm in the ground. The great Duke Adrian Blackthorne is nothing but a criminal hiding behind a title. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads turned toward Adrian and Evelyn as they entered. Someone whispered. Someone else laughed, nervous and shocked. Adrian didn't falter. He walked straight through the crowd, his head high, his expression carved from stone. Evelyn walked beside him, her hand tight on his arm. Celine's eyes locked onto them. And there he is, the man himself. Tell them, Your Grace. Tell them what you did. Tell them about Edmund. Tell them how your brother died because he couldn't live with the blood on his hands. Adrian stopped in front of her. When he spoke, his voice was cold, controlled, absolutely lethal. Get down from that chair. Celine smiled. No, I don't think I will. You've hidden the truth for too long. It's time everyone knew what kind of man you really are. The crowd was silent now, watching, waiting. Evelyn could feel the weight of their judgment pressing down like a physical thing. Adrian's jaw tightened. You don't know what you're doing, don't I? Celine's smile widened. I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm destroying you, just like you destroyed me. Then you're a fool, a new voice said. Everyone turned. Lord Cedric Vale stood at the edge of the crowd, his face calm, almost amused. Because Adrian didn't destroy you, Celine, I did. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Celine's smile faltered. What? Cedric stepped forward, his hands clasped behind his back. Thomas Ashcroft's death. Edmund's guilt. Adrian's cover-up. All of it was real. But the blackmail. He looked directly at Celine. That was me. I fed you information, gave you documents, pointed you toward Adrian like a weapon, because I knew if you destroyed him, the duchy would pass to me. Evelyn felt the floor drop out from under her. You're lying, Celine whispered. Am I? Cedric pulled a folded letter from his pocket and tossed it toward her. That's correspondence between you and me from 3 years ago. My handwriting, my seal. Read it. Celine stared at the letter like it was a snake. Slowly, she bent and picked it up, unfolded it, read. And as she did, the color drained from her face. No, she breathed. No, you said, you told me. I told you what you wanted to hear, Cedric said calmly. That Adrian was a monster, that he deserved to suffer, and you believed it because your grief made you desperate. He looked around at the crowd, spreading his hands. I used her. All of it. Because I wanted power. The silence that followed was deafening. Then Celine screamed, a raw animal sound of betrayal and rage. She threw herself at Cedric, but Adrian caught her mid-lunge, pulling her back. Let me go, she sobbed. Let me go, he destroyed everything. No, Adrian said quietly. He did. Not me. I made terrible choices, Celine. I'll own that. But I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted any of this. Celine collapsed against him, weeping. The crowd began to murmur, shifting, recalibrating. Guards appeared, escorting Cedric away. Someone called for a doctor. The orchestra, confused, started playing again. Evelyn stood frozen in the middle of it all, watching her husband hold the woman who had tried to destroy him, and realized with sudden, perfect clarity that nothing in her life had ever been what it seemed. They didn't speak on the ride home. Evelyn sat on one side of the carriage, Adrian on the other, the space between them vast and unbridgeable. Rain hammered against the roof, the wheels splashed through puddles. When they arrived at Blackthorne Manor, Adrian helped her down from the carriage without meeting her eyes. They walked inside in silence. The house was dark, the servants already in bed. Adrian gestured vaguely toward the stairs. I'll sleep in the guest room tonight. Evelyn caught his arm. No. He stopped, looked at her. No. She shook her head, unable to find words for what she was feeling. Not anger, not forgiveness. Something more complicated, tangled up with fear and revelation, and the sudden understanding that her husband was not the man she'd thought he was. He was far more broken, far more human. I don't want you to sleep in the guest room, she said finally. Evelyn, I want you to tell me everything, she interrupted. Every secret, every lie, every terrible thing you've done. Because I can't, her voice cracked. I can't live in this marriage anymore if we're strangers. Adrian stared at her, and in his eyes she saw war. The instinct to protect her warring with the need to be known. It will change everything, he whispered. Good, Evelyn said. Let it. For a long moment he didn't move. Then slowly he nodded. They went upstairs together, to the bedroom where this had all begun, where she had found a silk handkerchief and torn open a wound that had been festering for years. Adrian sat on the edge of the bed and began to talk. He told her about Edmund, wild, reckless Edmund, who had challenged Thomas Ashcroft to a duel over an insult that didn't matter. About the shot that went wrong, the body bleeding out on the grass. About the look in his brother's eyes when Adrian promised to fix it. He told her about the bribes, the threats, the men he'd ruined to keep Edmund free, about the judge he'd blackmailed, the witness who disappeared, the documents he'd burned in the middle of the night while Edmund slept upstairs. He told her about the day Edmund died, how he'd found his brother in the study with a pistol in his hand, and a note that said simply, I'm sorry, I can't anymore. He told her about Celine appearing at his door 6 months later, eyes hollow with grief, demanding answers he couldn't give, about the years of threats that followed. The handkerchief was just the latest, a reminder that his past would never let him go. And he told her the worst part, that he'd married Evelyn not because he loved her, he didn't even know her, but because he'd needed someone to stand beside him, someone respectable and untouchable, someone who could give him the appearance of normalcy while he drowned in guilt. When he finished, dawn was breaking outside the window. Gray light filtered through the curtains. Adrian sat hunched over, his head in his hands, looking like a man waiting for execution. Evelyn sat beside him and said, Why did you watch over me? He looked up. What? You said you protected me from an invisible threat. What threat? Adrian's expression was bleak. Cedric. I didn't trust him. I knew he wanted the duchy, knew he was capable of anything. I was afraid he'd use you to get to me, hurt you. So he gestured helplessly. I stayed close. Even though I knew you thought I was cold, even though I knew you were unhappy, you were protecting me. Always, he said hoarsely. Even when I couldn't tell you why. Something cracked open inside Evelyn's chest. Not love, not yet, but understanding, the beginning of it. She reached out and took his hand. Adrian flinched, like he'd been burned, but he didn't pull away. I don't forgive you, she said quietly. Not yet. Maybe not ever. What you did was wrong, illegal. You broke laws that exist for a reason. I know. But, she continued, squeezing his hand, I understand why you did it, and I think, her voice wavered, I think maybe we can start again. Honestly this time. No more secrets. Adrian looked at her like she'd just offered him salvation. Evelyn? No promises, she interrupted. No grand declarations. She took a shaky breath. Just tell me the truth from now on. All of it, no matter how ugly. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. They sat there as the sun rose, two people who had been strangers in a marriage finally beginning to see each other. Not as Duke and Duchess, not as husband and wife, but as two broken people trying to survive the weight of their own sins. And outside, somewhere in the rain-soaked streets of London, a silk handkerchief lay forgotten in a gutter, its gold embroidery already beginning to tarnish. But neither of them knew that yet. Neither of them knew that the real threat wasn't Cedric or Celine or the ghosts of the past. It was the letter that would arrive tomorrow morning, sealed with black wax and unsigned, containing a single line that would change everything. Your brother didn't kill himself. He was murdered, and I can prove it. The letter arrived with the morning post, delivered by a footman who had no idea he was carrying a bomb. Adrian stood in his study, still wearing yesterday's clothes, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. He'd left Evelyn upstairs an hour ago, finally asleep, after the longest night of their marriage. His hand shook as he broke the black wax seal. No crest, no marking, just anonymous and final as a grave. The words were simple, brutal in their simplicity. Your brother didn't kill himself. He was murdered, and I can prove it. Adrian read it 3 times. Each time, the world tilted further off its axis. Edmund's body in the study, the pistol in his hand, the blood spreading across the Persian rug like spilled wine. The note that said, "I'm sorry. I can't anymore." All of it a lie. He turned to the window, pressing his forehead against the cold glass, and felt something inside him fracture. Not break. He'd been broken for years. This was different. This was the sound of a man realizing that the guilt he'd carried like a cross had been built on sand. Someone had murdered his brother and made it look like suicide. Someone had let him suffer for 6 years, believing Edmund's death was his fault. And now that someone wanted him to know the truth. The question was why. Adrian crumpled the letter in his fist, but the words had already burned themselves into his brain. He could destroy the paper. He couldn't destroy what it meant. Behind him, the door opened. "You're still awake," Evelyn said quietly. He didn't turn around. Couldn't let her see his face right now. "I couldn't sleep." She crossed the room, her footsteps soft on the carpet. She'd changed into a simple morning dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. In the gray dawn light, she looked younger, less like the polished Duchess and more like the girl he'd married 4 years ago. "What is that?" she asked, nodding toward the crumpled paper in his hand. Adrian's jaw tightened. "Nothing. Don't." Her voice was sharp. "We agreed. No more lies." He turned to face her then, and whatever she saw in his expression made her go still. "Adrian." "What is it?" He held out the letter without speaking. She took it, smoothed out the creases, read. He watched her face change, confusion, then shock, then something harder. Anger. "When did this arrive?" she demanded. 10 minutes ago. And you were going to hide it from me. I was going to protect you from it. That's the same thing." She threw the letter onto his desk. "When are you going to understand that I don't need protection? I need partnership." Adrian's hands curled into fists. "Evelyn, you don't know what you're asking for. If Edmund was murdered, if someone killed him and framed it as suicide, then whoever did it is still out there, still dangerous. Then we find them. We." The word hung between them like a challenge. "Yes," Evelyn said firmly. "We. Because this isn't just about you anymore, Adrian. This is about us, our marriage, our future. And I'll be damned if I'm going to stand by and watch you destroy yourself over secrets." He stared at her, this woman he'd married out of convenience, this stranger who was becoming something else entirely. She stood there in the morning light, chin raised, eyes blazing, and he realized with sudden clarity that somewhere in the wreckage of last night, she'd stopped being afraid of him. She'd started fighting for him instead. "All right," he said quietly, "together." The relief that crossed her face was so profound it made his chest ache. "Where do we start?" she asked. Adrian picked up the letter again, studying the handwriting. Black ink, careful script, nothing distinctive. The paper was expensive, heavy weight, good quality. Whoever sent this had money, education, access to information that should have been buried. "We need to find out who knew Edmund died in my study," he said slowly. "Who had access to the house that day? Who benefited from his death?" Evelyn's brow furrowed. "You said Cedric wanted the duchy. Could he have—" "No." Adrian shook his head. "Cedric's ambitious, but he's not a killer. This is someone else. Someone patient enough to wait 6 years before revealing the truth." "Why wait at all?" Evelyn asked. "Why tell you now?" "That," Adrian said grimly, "is what terrifies me." Chumped. They started with the servants. Mrs. Holloway had been the housekeeper at Blackthorn Manor for 20 years. She sat in the drawing room with her hands folded in her lap, her spine straight, her face carefully neutral. Adrian had seen that expression before, the mask servants wore when they knew more than they were supposed to. "Tell me about the day Edmund died," he said. Mrs. Holloway's fingers twitched. "Your Grace, I don't think—" "I'm not asking." Adrian leaned forward. "I'm ordering you. Tell me everything you remember." She swallowed hard. "It was morning, early. I heard the gunshot from the kitchen. By the time I reached the study, you were already there, holding him. Who else was in the house? The footman, cook, Mary, the upstairs maid, and—" She hesitated. "And who?" "Lord Cedric. He'd stayed the night after dinner. He came running when he heard the shot. Adrian's blood went cold. Cedric was here." "Yes, Your Grace." Mrs. Holloway's voice was barely audible. "He was the one who sent for the doctor. Who helped you?" She broke off, her composure cracking. Who helped you carry Lord Edmund upstairs? Did anyone else enter the study before the doctor arrived? She shook her head. No, Your Grace, you locked the door. You wouldn't let anyone in except Lord Cedric. Adrian sat back, his mind racing. 6 years ago, he'd been drowning in grief, barely functional. He trusted Cedric to handle the arrangements, to keep the servants quiet, to make sure Edmund's death looked like what it appeared to be. He trusted him. Jesus Christ. Evelyn's hand closed over his. You couldn't have known, but he should have. Should have seen through Cedric's concern, his helpfulness, the way he'd smoothly taken control while Adrian fell apart. He'd been so wrapped up in guilt, he'd missed the obvious. Cedric had been there, had access, had opportunity. And 6 years later, he'd tried to destroy Adrian using Selene as a weapon. Mrs. Holloway, Evelyn said gently, did you notice anything strange that morning? Anything out of place? The housekeeper's eyes darted between them. I'm not sure I should say, my lady. Please, Evelyn pressed. It's important. Mrs. Holloway's hands twisted in her lap. The pistol, the one Lord Edmund used, it wasn't his. What? Her voice dropped to a whisper. Lord Edmund kept his dueling pistols in a case in his room. Matched pair, custom made. But the gun in the study, it was different. Heavier. Older. I only noticed because I'd cleaned Lord Edmund's pistols the week before. I knew what they looked like. The room went silent. Adrian's pulse hammered in his ears. You're certain? Yes, Your Grace? She looked up, tears in her eyes. I never said anything because I thought maybe he'd borrowed one. That it didn't matter. But I've thought about it every day for 6 years. That pistol didn't belong to Lord Edmund. Did you tell anyone else about this? Evelyn asked. Mrs. Holloway shook her head. Who would I tell? Lord Adrian was grieving. Lord Cedric said it would be better not to speak of it. And then, she swallowed. And then I was afraid. Afraid of what it meant. Adrian stood abruptly, crossing to the window. His hands were shaking again. Someone had brought a gun into his house, put it in Edmund's hand, and made it look like suicide. Someone who knew where Edmund would be, when Adrian would find him. How to make it all look seamless. Cedric. It had to be Cedric. Thank you, Mrs. Holloway, Evelyn said quietly. You can go. The housekeeper rose, her face pale. Your Grace, if there's anything I can do... Our souls. There is, Adrian said without turning around. Don't tell anyone we spoke to you, not the other servants, not anyone who comes to the house asking questions. Understood. Yes, Your Grace. She left. The door closed softly behind her. Adrian pressed his palms against the window frame, staring out at the manicured gardens, the hedge maze, the fountain where he and Edmund used to play as children. His brother's laughter echoed in his memory, bright and careless and gone. We need proof, he said finally. Evelyn came to stand beside him. What kind of proof? The pistol. If Mrs. Holloway is right, then the gun used to kill Edmund is evidence. We need to find it. You destroyed it, didn't you? Adrian closed his eyes. Yes. I had everything from that day burned. The gun, Edmund's clothes, the note. I wanted it gone. I wanted to forget. Then we're back to nothing. No. Adrian's voice hardened. We're back to Cedric. He was there. He helped me. He would have seen the pistol. If it wasn't Edmund's, he would have known. Which means he's either the killer or he knows who is. Adrian turned to look at her. Either way, we need to talk to him. Evelyn's expression was grim. He's not going to confess. Not after what happened at the ball. The guards took him away, but you know his family has influence. He'll be released soon if he hasn't been already. Then we don't ask him to confess. Adrian's smile was cold, sharp as broken glass. We make him think we already know everything. We back him into a corner, and we watch him break. And if he doesn't break, then we push harder. We'll cham. They found Cedric at his club on St. James Street, surrounded by leather chairs and old money and the kind of privilege that believed itself untouchable. He sat by the fireplace with a brandy, looking relaxed despite the scandal from the night before. When he saw Adrian and Evelyn enter, his smile didn't waver. Adrian, he said warmly. Evelyn, what a pleasant surprise. Adrian crossed the room in 3 long strides and grabbed Cedric by his collar, hauling him out of the chair. The brandy glass hit the floor and shattered. Around them, conversation stopped. Heads turned. Outside, Adrian growled, "Now!" To Cedric's credit, he didn't struggle, just raised his hands in mock surrender and let Adrian drag him through the club toward the private rooms in the back. Evelyn followed, her face pale but determined. Adrian shoved Cedric into a small study and slammed the door. Locked it. "What the hell is this about?" Cedric demanded, straightening his collar. "Edmund." Cedric's expression flickered. Just for a second. Then the mask was back in place. "What about him?" Adrian pulled the letter from his pocket and threw it at Cedric. It hit his chest and fell to the floor. "Read it." Cedric bent down, picked it up, read. When he looked up again, his face was carefully blank. "This is... Don't!" Adrian's voice was lethal. "Don't lie to me. Not now. Not about this. I have no idea what you're talking about." The pistol wasn't Edmund's. Cedric went very still. "You were there," Adrian continued, his voice low and dangerous. "You helped me that morning. You saw the gun. You knew it wasn't his, and you said nothing, because there was nothing to say." Cedric's voice was calm, but his eyes had gone flat. "Edmund killed himself. The gun didn't matter." "It mattered," Evelyn said sharply, "when someone murdered him and made it look like suicide." Cedric's gaze snapped to her. "You don't know what you're saying, don't I?" She stepped forward. "You were there. You had access. You wanted Adrian's title. And 6 years later, you tried to destroy him using Celine. You admitted it yourself in front of 300 witnesses. That was different. Was it?" Adrian moved closer. "Or was it the same plan you've been executing all along? Kill Edmund. Drive me to guilt and madness. Wait until I self-destructed. Then step in and take what you thought you deserved." "You're insane," Cedric spat. "Am I?" "Then explain the letter. Explain who sent it. Explain why someone wants me to know the truth now." Cedric's jaw worked. "I don't know, liar." "I don't know," Cedric's voice rose. "But I'll tell you this, Adrian. You want to go digging into Edmund's death, you'd better be prepared for what you find, because the truth isn't what you think it is." "Then tell me what it is." "No." Cedric's smile was ugly. "You figure it out. You're so convinced I'm the villain. Prove it." Adrian's hand shot out, grabbing Cedric by the throat and slamming him back against the wall. Evelyn gasped, but he didn't let go, just squeezed until Cedric's face started turning red. "Tell me," Adrian hissed. Cedric's hands clawed at Adrian's wrist. His mouth opened and closed like a fish, and in his eyes, Adrian saw fear, real, animal fear, and something else. Guilt. Adrian let go. Cedric collapsed against the wall, coughing, gasping. When he finally looked up, his expression was broken. "I didn't kill him," he rasped. "But I know who did." The words hung in the air like smoke. "Who?" Adrian demanded. Cedric's laugh was bitter. "You're not going to believe me. Try me. Your father." The world stopped. Adrian stared at him, unable to process what he'd just heard. His father. The old Duke. Dead for 4 years now, buried in the family crypt with honors and ceremony and all the trappings of nobility. "That's impossible," he said. "Is it?" Cedric straightened, rubbing his throat. "Think about it, Adrian. Edmund killed Thomas Ashcroft. You covered it up. But your father, he was furious, said you destroyed the family honor, that Edmund was a liability." Adrian's hands were shaking. He's lying. He has to be lying. But the pieces were falling into place with horrible inevitability. "I was there the night before Edmund died," Cedric continued quietly. "Your father called me to his estate, told me Edmund couldn't be trusted, that he'd confess eventually, expose everything you'd done to save him. He asked me if I knew a way to," Cedric's voice caught, "to handle the problem quietly. And what did you say?" "I said no." Cedric's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I told him Edmund deserved a chance, that he'd get better. And your father looked at me and said," his voice broke. He said, "Then I'll do it myself." Adrian's vision swam. The morning Edmund died, their father had visited, had breakfast with Adrian in the dining room, had asked after Edmund's health with such fatherly concern. And then, Jesus Christ, He didn't give Edmund a choice, Cedric whispered. Made it look like suicide. Made sure you'd find him. Made sure you'd destroy any evidence in your grief. It was perfect, clean, and you blamed yourself for 6 years while he watched. Why didn't you tell me? Because I couldn't prove it. Cedric wiped his eyes roughly. Your father covered his tracks. The pistol was his, an old service revolver from his military days. Untraceable. And he had an alibi. Left the house before you woke up. Was miles away when the shot was fired. But he was here. For 10 minutes. Just long enough. Adrian's knees gave out. He sat down hard on the floor, his back against the wall, and felt everything he'd believed shatter around him. His father. The man he'd respected. Feared. Tried his whole life to please. A murderer. And the worst part, the part that made bile rise in Adrian's throat, was that it made sense. The old Duke had always valued reputation above all else. Had always been cold, calculating, willing to do whatever it took to protect the family name, including killing his own son. Evelyn knelt beside Adrian, her hand on his shoulder. I'm so sorry. He couldn't speak, could barely breathe. There's more, Cedric said quietly. Adrian's head snapped up. What? The letter, the one you received this morning. Cedric pulled an identical envelope from his pocket. I got one too. Muck. They sat in Cedric's carriage outside the club, the three of them crammed into a space meant for two, reading their letters side by side. Cedric's was longer, more detailed. It contained dates, times, locations, evidence that the old Duke had purchased a pistol from a black market dealer 3 days before Edmund's death. Evidence that he'd paid off a servant to let him into Blackthorn Manor through the kitchen entrance. Evidence that he'd been in the study with Edmund for less than 5 minutes. 5 minutes to murder your own child and walk away clean. Who sent these? Evelyn asked. Cedric shook his head. I don't know. But whoever it is has access to information that should be impossible to obtain. The gun dealer is dead. The servant disappeared years ago. He gestured helplessly at the papers. This is the kind of documentation that takes years to compile. Someone's been watching us, Adrian said slowly. Watching all of us. Collecting evidence. Waiting. But why reveal it now? That was the question. Adrian stared out the carriage window at the London streets, busy with afternoon traffic. Vendors calling their wares. Ladies shopping. Life continuing as if the world hadn't just inverted itself. Whoever sent these letters wanted him to know the truth, but they also wanted something else, something they thought Adrian would give them once he understood what had really happened. The duchy, he said suddenly. What? The duchy. Adrian turned to Cedric. You said you wanted it. That's why you manipulated Celine, but what if someone else wants it too? Someone with a legitimate claim. There is no one else, Cedric said. The line of succession is clear. You, then me, then... He stopped. His face went pale. Then who? Evelyn demanded. Edmund had a son. The words hit like a thunderclap. What? Adrian whispered. Cedric's hands were shaking. Your brother, before he died, there was a woman, a merchant's daughter. I thought it was just a dalliance, but... He swallowed. But she left London suddenly, 3 months before Edmund died, and I heard rumors, whispers that she was pregnant. Adrian's heart hammered against his ribs. Why didn't you tell me? Because I didn't know if it was true. And after Edmund died, I lost track of her. She disappeared, changed her name. I assumed... He broke off. I assumed the child wasn't real, that it was just gossip. But if it was real, Evelyn said slowly, then Edmund's son would have a claim to the duchy, stronger than Cedric's. And if that son is now grown, Adrian added, with the voice dropping to barely above a whisper, he'd want what's rightfully his. The three of them sat in silence, the weight of the revelation pressing down like a physical thing. We need to find him, Adrian said finally. How? Cedric asked. We don't even know his name. Then we start with the mother. Adrian's voice hardened with purpose. What was her name? Catherine. Catherine Thorne. She worked at her father's shipping company near the docks. Evelyn straightened. Thorne? That's my mother's maiden name, Adrian finished. He felt something cold settle in his stomach. Edmund named her after our mother. Or, Cedric said quietly, she took the name deliberately. To tie herself to your family. Either way, she's the key. Adrian pushed open the carriage door. We find Catherine Thorne. We find the son. And we find out who's been pulling the strings. Book. The shipping company had closed years ago, but the harbor master remembered the Thornes. Respectable family, he said, spitting tobacco juice into the Thames. Old man Thorne ran a tight operation until his daughter got herself in trouble, ruined the family name. He sent her away, wouldn't speak of her after that. Where did she go? Evelyn asked. North? Yorkshire, maybe? Or Scotland? He shrugged. Somewhere she could disappear. Rich men's bastards always end up disappeared. Adrian's jaw tightened. Do you know if the child survived? The harbor master studied him with rheumy eyes. Why do you want to know? Because that child has a claim to everything I own. The old man whistled low. That's a problem. Yes. Adrian pulled out a purse heavy with coins. It is. Now tell me what you know. The harbor master pocketed the money without counting it. I heard she had a boy. Healthy, strong. She raised him herself, worked as a seamstress to make ends meet. But the boy... He paused. The boy was smart. Too smart. People talked about how he could read and write before he was 5. How he asked questions about his father. What happened to them? Don't know about the mother, but the boy... He scratched his beard. I heard he came back to London about a year ago, working as a clerk in some legal office. Probably figured out who his father was by now. What's his name? The harbor master shrugged. Goes by Thomas. Thomas Thorne. Adrian's blood turned to ice. Thomas. The same name as the man Edmund had killed. It couldn't be coincidence. Where's this legal office? Evelyn asked, her voice tight. Near Lincoln's Inn. Can't remember which one exactly, but shouldn't be hard to find. How many clerks named Thomas Thorne can there be? Bakakit. They found him 3 hours later. The office was small, tucked between a bookshop and a tailor on a narrow street that smelled of ink and old paper. The sign outside read, Whitmore and Associates, Solicitors. Adrian pushed open the door. A bell chimed. Inside, the office was cramped and dim, lined with shelves full of legal documents and law books. A young man sat at a desk by the window, bent over a contract, his pen scratching across the page. He looked up when they entered. Adrian felt the world tilt. The young man had Edmund's eyes, the same blue-green, the same sharp intelligence. His hair was darker, his features harder, but the resemblance was unmistakable. This was Edmund's son. There was no doubt. Can I help you? The young man asked. His voice was cultured, educated, nothing like the street accent Adrian had expected. We're looking for Thomas Thorne, Evelyn said. You found him. The young man set down his pen. What do you want? Adrian stepped forward. I know who you are, Thomas interrupted. Adrian Blackthorne, Duke of Blackthorne. My uncle. The word hung in the air. You know, Adrian said slowly. Thomas smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I've known for years. My mother told me before she died. About my father. About what happened. About how you tried to save him and failed. I didn't know about you. Of course you didn't. Thomas stood, and Adrian saw he was tall, lean, coiled with the kind of tension that came from years of controlled anger. My mother made sure of that. She didn't want your guilt money or your pity. She wanted me to grow up free of the Blackthorne name and all its poison. Then why reveal yourself now? Evelyn asked. Thomas's eyes shifted to her. Lady Blackthorne, I've heard much about you. He turned back to Adrian. I didn't reveal myself. Someone else did that. The letters. The evidence. All of it delivered to my door 3 days ago with a note saying it was time I claimed what was mine. Who sent them? I don't know. Thomas crossed his arms. But whoever it was knew everything. About my father's death. About your father's crime. About the conspiracy that's kept the truth buried for 6 years. They handed me a weapon and told me to use it. Are you going to? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then, my father was murdered by his own father. You covered up a killing to save him, and it destroyed him anyway. Your guilt has poisoned everything, your marriage, your relationships, your life, and now I have the power to take everything from you. Yes, Adrian said. You do. So the question is, Thomas continued, what are you willing to do to stop me? Adrian met his nephew's eyes, Edmund's eyes, and felt something settle inside him. A decision. A choice. Nothing, he said quietly. Thomas blinked. What? I won't fight you. Adrian's voice was steady. If you want the duchy, take it. If you want justice for Edmund, demand it. I won't stand in your way. I'm done with lies, done with secrets, done with protecting a legacy built on murder. Thomas stared at him, searching for deception. You're serious, completely. Why? Because Edmund was your father, and he deserved better than what this family gave him. Because you exist, and that means some part of him survived. Adrian's voice roughened. And because I'm tired of being haunted by ghosts when there's someone standing right here who actually has his blood. Beside him, Evelyn's hand found his, squeezed. Thomas looked between them, his expression unreadable. Then he laughed. A short, bitter sound. You think it's that simple? That you can just hand over the duchy and wash your hands of everything? No, Adrian said. I think it's going to be messy and complicated and probably destroy what's left of my reputation. But I also think it's right. And if I don't want it, Thomas's voice was sharp. If I don't want to be a duke or live in your manor or carry the Blackthorn name, what then? Then we figure out something else. Adrian spread his hands. I'm not your enemy, Thomas, and I'm not your father, but I am your family, and I'm offering you a choice he never got. The office fell silent. Through the window, London carried on. Carriages rattled past, vendors shouted. Life continued its relentless forward march. Finally, Thomas sat back down. His shoulders sagged. I need time, he said. To think. He ran a hand through his hair. To figure out what I want. Take all the time you need, Evelyn said gently. Thomas nodded. Then, there's something you should know. About the person who sent the letters. What? They're not done. Thomas pulled open a drawer and produced another envelope. Black wax seal. No marking. This arrived this morning. For you. Adrian took it with numb fingers. Broke the seal. Read. The words were simple. Final. The truth is almost out. One more piece remains. Come to the Blackthorn family crypt at midnight tomorrow. Alone. Or everyone learns what really happened to Edmund and what you did to cover it up. Adrian looked up at Thomas. This is a trap. Obviously. Thomas's smile was grim. Question is, are you walking into it? Adrian folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his pocket. He thought about Edmund, about his father, about 6 years of guilt and lies and ghosts. He thought about Evelyn standing beside him, holding his hand, refusing to let go. And he thought about this young man in front of him, Edmund's son, carrying the weight of a legacy he never asked for. Yes, Adrian said, I am. Because whoever was doing this, whoever had orchestrated everything from Edmund's murder to Cedric's manipulation to Thomas's sudden appearance, they were tired of waiting. And so was Adrian. Tomorrow night, he would go to the crypt alone. And he would finally learn the truth, even if it killed him. The Blackthorn family crypt sat at the edge of the estate, half hidden by ancient oaks whose branches clawed at the sky like skeletal hands. Adrian had not visited since his father's funeral 4 years ago. The place smelled of damp stone and decay, of endings that refused to stay buried. Midnight approached with the slow inevitability of a noose tightening. Adrian stood before the iron gates, alone as instructed, and felt the weight of every decision that had led him here pressing down on his shoulders. Behind him, London slept in blissful ignorance. Before him, the crypt waited with its secrets and its dead. He'd left Evelyn at the manor despite her protests, had looked into her eyes and seen fear there, not for herself, but for him. That fear had nearly broken his resolve, nearly made him turn back. But some truths could only be faced alone. The gate creaked as he pushed it open. The sound echoed through the stillness like a scream. Inside, stone steps descended into darkness. Adrian pulled a lantern from his coat and lit it, the flame casting dancing shadows that made the walls seem alive. Down he went, each step measured, deliberate. The air grew colder, thicker, heavy with the smell of earth and old bones. The Blackthorns had been buried here for 300 years, dukes and duchesses, sons and daughters, all of them reduced to names carved in marble, their legacies crumbling to dust. At the bottom of the stairs, the main chamber opened before him. Rows of stone sarcophagi lined the walls, each bearing the family crest. His grandfather, his great-grandfather, generations of men who had worn the title before him, who had believed themselves untouchable. And there, in the center of it all, his father's tomb. Adrian stopped in front of it, staring at the inscription. Here lies Duke William Blackthorne, beloved father, devoted patriarch. May he rest in eternal peace. Lies. All of it. The man in that tomb was a murderer who had killed his own son to protect a reputation built on blood and deception. Did you know, a voice said from the shadows, that power is just another word for isolation? Adrian spun around, his hand going to the pistol concealed in his coat. A figure stepped into the lantern light. For a moment, Adrian couldn't process what he was seeing. His mind rejected it, scrambled for alternative explanations, found none. Because the person standing before him, wearing a smile as cold as the stone surrounding them, was Evelyn, his wife. You, he whispered. Evelyn's expression didn't change. She looked elegant even here, dressed in dark traveling clothes, her hair pulled back from her face. But there was something different about her, something harder. The softness he'd glimpsed over the past few days was gone, replaced by a calculation that made his blood run cold. Surprised, she said. Her voice was conversational, almost pleasant. You shouldn't be. You of all people should understand that the person standing closest to you is always the one with the best angle to strike. Adrian's hand tightened on the pistol. You sent the letters. Of course I did. Evelyn took a step closer. All of them. The one to you, the one to Cedric, the one to Thomas. I've been orchestrating this entire dance for months, Adrian, and you've played your part beautifully. His mind reeled. The handkerchief. Celine. The revelation about Edmund's murder, Thomas's sudden appearance. All of it, every twist, every revelation, had been constructed by the woman he'd married 4 years ago. Why? He managed. Evelyn laughed, but the sound held no warmth. Why? Because you took everything from me, Adrian. You just didn't know it. She moved past him to stand beside his father's tomb, running her fingers over the cold marble. My real name isn't Evelyn Hartwell, she said quietly. It's Evelyn Ashcroft. The name hit him like a physical blow. Ashcroft. Thomas Ashcroft was my brother, she continued. The man your brother Edmund killed in that duel. The man whose death you covered up to save your family's reputation. No. Adrian's voice was hoarse. Celine is my cousin. Evelyn's smile was razor sharp. We've been working together from the beginning. The handkerchief, the confrontation at the ball, all of it was theater designed to make you trust me, to make you think I was your ally against the world. Adrian felt the ground shift beneath him. Every conversation they'd had, every moment of vulnerability he'd shared, every time he'd let his guard down because he thought she was on his side. All of it had been a lie. You married me, he said slowly, trying to understand. 4 years ago, before any of this started. Yes. Evelyn's voice was matter-of-fact. I spent 2 years preparing, changed my name, created a new identity, wormed my way into London society. When the marriage brokers approached me about becoming a duchess, I made sure I was the perfect choice. Beautiful enough to be desirable, but not so beautiful you'd actually fall in love with me. Connected enough to be respectable, but not so connected you'd dig too deep into my past. And I never questioned it. Why would you? Evelyn's eyes were ice. Men like you don't question gifts handed to you. You saw a convenient wife who would play her role and stay out of your way. And that's exactly what I gave you. For 4 years, I played the perfect duchess, smiled at your parties, managed your household, slept in your bed, all while I gathered information, built connections, and waited for the right moment to destroy you. Adrian's hand shook on the pistol. Edmund's death. My father's involvement. You knew all of it. Not at first. Evelyn turned to face him fully. But I'm patient, and I'm thorough. I hired investigators, bribed servants, tracked down witnesses. It took 3 years to piece together the full truth, that Edmund hadn't just killed Thomas, he'd been manipulated into that duel by your father, who saw Thomas as a threat to a business deal, that Edmund's guilt was manufactured, that his death wasn't suicide at all. She pulled a document from her coat and tossed it toward Adrian. It landed at his feet. That's a signed confession, she said. From the servant your father paid to let him into the manor the morning Edmund died. Took me 18 months to find him. Another 6 to convince him to talk. But once I had that, I had everything. Adrian stared at the paper without picking it up. Why not just go to the authorities? Why this elaborate game? Because the authorities wouldn't care, Evelyn snapped. Your family has too much power, too many connections. They'd bury the evidence and I'd disappear. So I needed something better. I needed to dismantle you piece by piece. Your reputation, your alliances, your sense of self. I needed you broken before I destroyed you completely. Her voice dropped, became almost gentle. And the beautiful part, Adrian, is that you did most of the work yourself. You were so wrapped up in guilt, so desperate to protect your family's name, that you never saw what was right in front of you. Even when I handed you the handkerchief, even when I pushed you toward the truth about Edmund, you still trusted me. Because I thought you were my wife. I am your wife. Evelyn's smile was cruel. That's what makes this perfect. When this is all over, when your titles are stripped and your estate seized and your name is synonymous with corruption and murder, I'll still be the Duchess of Blackthorn, because unlike you, I didn't break any laws. I just revealed the truth. Adrian's throat tightened. What about Thomas? Is he even real? Oh, he's real. Evelyn's expression softened slightly. Edmund's bastard son, raised in poverty because your family couldn't be bothered to acknowledge him. I found him 2 years ago, educated him, gave him purpose, and when the time came, I gave him the chance to claim what should have been his all along. So this was never about justice for your brother. It was always about justice for Thomas. Evelyn's voice hardened again. My brother died because Edmund Blackthorn was a spoiled aristocrat who thought honor meant drawing blood. Your father murdered Edmund to protect himself. And you covered it all up and lived in your guilt like it was penance. But guilt doesn't bring back the dead, Adrian. Revenge does. Adrian pulled the pistol from his coat, leveling it at his wife. At the stranger wearing her face. You won't shoot me, Evelyn said calmly. You don't know that. Yes, I do. She took a step toward him. Because you're not a killer, Adrian. You're a coward who hides behind other people's sins. You let your father murder Edmund rather than stand up to him. You let Edmund's son grow up in poverty rather than search for him. You let me into your bed and your home and your heart, and you never once questioned why. Stop. No. Evelyn's eyes blazed. You need to hear this. You need to understand that your entire life has been built on lies you chose to believe because they were easier than the truth. You could have saved Edmund, could have stopped your father, could have found Thomas years ago, but you didn't because you were too busy protecting yourself. The pistol wavered in Adrian's hand. She was right. God help him. She was right. Every choice he'd made, every lie he'd told himself had been about self-preservation, about maintaining the illusion of honor while the rot spread beneath. What happens now? He asked quietly. Evelyn reached into her coat and pulled out another document. This is a full accounting of your family's crimes. Edmund's cover-up, your father's murder, the bribes, the destroyed evidence, all of it. Tomorrow morning, it goes to every newspaper in London. By noon, the House of Lords will call for your arrest. And Thomas becomes the rightful Duke of Blackthorn. With my help, of course. She smiled. I've spent 4 years learning how to run your estate, manage your finances, navigate your social circles. Thomas gets the title. I keep the power. Everyone wins, except you. Adrian lowered the pistol. His hand felt numb. Everything felt numb. You could run, Evelyn said. Her voice was almost kind now. Take what money you can carry and disappear. I won't stop you. In fact, I'd prefer it. Much cleaner than a trial and execution, and you get everything. Yes. Evelyn's smile was triumphant. Your title, your wealth, your legacy, all of it transferred to the people you destroyed. Poetic, don't you think? Adrian stared at this woman he'd married, the stranger who had shared his bed and his home and his darkest moments, all while plotting his destruction. He thought about the night she'd held him when the nightmares came, the morning she'd smiled at him across the breakfast table, the moment in the bedroom when she'd demanded the truth. Had any of it been real? Or had it all been performance? One question, he said finally. Evelyn inclined her head. Did you ever feel anything for me? Even once. Her expression flickered. Just for a second, something like regret crossed her face. Then it was gone. No, she said. You were always just a means to an end. The words should have hurt, should have broken something inside him. Instead, they clarified everything. All his life, Adrian had been surrounded by people who wanted something from him. His title, his money, his influence. He'd mistaken transaction for relationship so many times he'd forgotten the difference. But he knew now. Standing in a crypt full of dead men's lies, facing a wife who had never been his, he finally understood what he'd lost by trying so hard to hold on to power, everything that actually mattered. "All right," he said quietly. Evelyn blinked. "All right, what?" "All right, take it. The duchy, the estate, all of it. You've earned it. This isn't a negotiation." "I know." Adrian set the pistol down on his father's tomb. "I'm surrendering, completely. You win." Evelyn stared at him suspiciously. "This is a trick." "No. It's acceptance." Adrian's voice was steady now. "You spent 4 years destroying me, Evelyn, and you succeeded. I'm broken. My reputation will be ruined by tomorrow. My family legacy is ash. Everything I thought I was has been stripped away." He took a step toward her. "But you know what I realized, standing here, listening to you? You didn't destroy me. You freed me." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "The duchy was a prison," Adrian said. "The title, the responsibility, the constant fear of scandal, all of it was a cage I was born into. I never chose it, never wanted it. I just accepted it because that's what blackthorns do. We carry the weight, and we never complain, and we die alone in crypts like this one, surrounded by the ghosts of men who made the same mistakes we did. Stop." "No. You stop." Adrian's voice grew stronger. "You wanted revenge. You wanted to punish me for Edmund's sins, for my father's crimes, for every injustice the Blackthorn family ever committed. Fine. You've done that. But you made a mistake, Evelyn. What mistake? You assumed I wanted to hold on to this, that losing the duchy would destroy me. But the truth is," he looked around at the stone walls, the dead men's tombs, the weight of history pressing down. "I'm relieved. You've given me permission to walk away from all of this, to become someone other than the Duke of Blackthorn, to actually live instead of just existing inside a legacy I never earned." Evelyn's face had gone pale. "You're insane." "Maybe." Adrian smiled, and for the first time in years it felt genuine. "Or maybe I'm finally sane. Either way, you don't get the satisfaction of watching me suffer. Because I'm grateful. Thank you, Evelyn, for showing me who I really am, and for giving me the courage to let it all go." He turned toward the stairs. "Where are you going?" Evelyn demanded. "Away." Adrian didn't look back. "There's nothing left for me here. No title to protect, no reputation to salvage, no family legacy to uphold. I'm free." "Wait." But he was already climbing the steps, leaving behind the crypt and its dead and the woman who had torn his life apart to build her own. Behind him, he heard Evelyn's voice, sharp with something that might have been panic. "Adrian, stop. You can't just walk away. The newspapers, the evidence, you'll be arrested. Then I'll be arrested." His voice echoed down the stone corridor. "But I won't be the Duke of Blackthorn when they take me. I'll just be Adrian, and that's more than I've been in years." He reached the top of the stairs and emerged into the cold night air. The moon hung low and heavy, casting silver light across the estate grounds. In the distance, Blackthorn Manor glowed with warm light, every window bright. And standing at the gate, waiting for him, was someone he hadn't expected to see, Thomas. Edmund's son stood with his arms crossed, his face unreadable in the moonlight. Beside him, Adrian's heart stopped. Beside him stood Evelyn, but not the Evelyn from the crypt. This Evelyn wore a simple dress, her hair loose, her face streaked with tears. She looked terrified, exhausted, real. "What?" Adrian started. "The woman you were just talking to," Thomas said quietly, "isn't your wife." Adrian turned back toward the crypt entrance, and as he did, the woman who had called herself Evelyn emerged from the darkness. But in the moonlight, her features shifted, became clearer. It was Celine Ashcroft. The real Evelyn stepped forward, her voice breaking. "She locked me in the wine cellar 3 hours ago. Took my clothes, my mannerisms. She's been impersonating me. I've been screaming for help, but the servants couldn't hear." Adrian's mind spun. The conversation in the crypt. The confession. the elaborate revenge plot. None of it had been his wife. Celine smiled from the crypt entrance, and in the moonlight, Adrian could see the subtle differences. The sharper cheekbones, the colder eyes, close enough to fool him in the dark, but not close enough to fool anyone who actually knew Evelyn. "Surprise," Celine said. "Did you really think your precious wife was capable of that kind of deception? She's too soft, too forgiving, so I gave her a little help." "You're insane," Evelyn whispered. "No, I'm dedicated." Celine's voice was ice. "You thought you could stop me at the ball, expose Cedric, play the hero and save your husband. But you forgot one thing, Duchess. I don't give up. I adapt." She pulled out a pistol, Adrian's pistol, the one he'd left on his father's tomb. "Here's what's going to happen," Celine said. "The documents I described are real. They're already on their way to the newspapers. By morning, everyone will know what the Blackthorns did. But there's one more piece to this story that hasn't been written yet." "What piece?" Adrian said slowly. "The tragic murder-suicide." Celine's smile widened. The guilt-ridden duke who killed his wife before taking his own life. Poetic. Fitting. And it ties everything up so beautifully. She raised the pistol. Thomas moved, but Cellini swung the gun toward him. "Don't. I'll shoot the bastard first, then work my way up." Everyone froze. Adrian looked at Evelyn, his real wife, trembling with fear but standing her ground. He looked at Thomas, Edmund's son, caught in a conspiracy that had consumed his entire existence. And he looked at Celine, driven mad by grief and revenge, holding all their lives in her hands. In that moment, Adrian understood something fundamental about power. It wasn't about titles or money or legacy. It was about the choice you made when everything else was stripped away. When you stood naked before your own mortality and decided what mattered more, survival or meaning. He'd spent his whole life choosing survival, protecting himself, his family, his reputation. And where had it gotten him? Standing in front of a crypt with a madwoman pointing a gun at the people he'd failed to protect. No more. Adrian stepped between Celine and Evelyn. "Move!" Celine hissed. "No, I will shoot you." "Then shoot me." Adrian's voice was steady. "But you don't get them. Not my wife, not Thomas. If you want blood, take mine. I'm the one who covered up Thomas Ashcroft's death. I'm the one who protected Edmund. I'm the one responsible for everything that happened. They're innocent." "Innocent," Celine spat. "Your wife married into a family of murderers. The bastard carries killer's blood. No one is innocent." "Then neither are you," Adrian said quietly. "You've become exactly what you hated. A person willing to kill innocent people to satisfy your revenge." The gun wavered. "My brother died." "I know." Adrian's voice softened. "And I'm sorry, truly. Thomas Ashcroft deserved better. Edmund deserved better. You deserved better. But killing us won't bring him back. It won't fill the hole his death left. It will just make you a murderer too." Celine's hand was shaking now. Tears streamed down her face. "I have nothing left," she whispered. "No family, no purpose, just this. You have a choice." Adrian took a step closer. "You can pull that trigger and destroy what's left of yourself. Or you can walk away. Let the newspapers do their work. Let the truth destroy the Blackthorn name without more blood. You've already won, Celine. You've already broken us. Don't let revenge break you too." For a long moment the night held its breath. Then Celine's hand dropped. The pistol fell to the ground. She collapsed to her knees, sobbing, and Adrian knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said again, "for everything." Behind him, Evelyn let out a shaky breath. Thomas stood frozen, watching the scene with wide eyes. And in the distance, the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon. Almats. They didn't go back to the manor. Instead, they sat on the steps of the crypt as the sun rose, 4 people bound together by tragedy and choice. Celine had stopped crying. Now she just looked empty, hollowed out. "What happens now?" she asked. "That's up to you," Adrian said. "The documents will be published. My family's crimes will be exposed. But what you do next, whether you press charges, whether you seek more revenge, that's your decision. I don't know what I want anymore." "Then figure it out." Thomas spoke for the first time, his voice gentle. "You've spent years focused on destroying them. Maybe it's time to figure out what you want to build instead." Celine looked at Edmund's son, her nephew by marriage, and something like recognition passed between them. The real Evelyn sat close to Adrian, her hand in his. She hadn't said much since being freed from the wine cellar, just stayed close, as if reassuring herself he was real. I meant what I said, Adrian told her quietly. In the crypt, about being free. She turned to look at him. You thought I was the one who betrayed you, and you still said you were grateful. Because I was. Adrian squeezed her hand. Whoever was saying those words, Celine, you, anyone, they were true. I've been trapped inside this title my whole life. And if losing it means I get to actually live, then maybe it's not a loss at all. What will you do? I don't know. He looked out at the estate, at the manor where generations of Blackthorns had lived and died. Maybe we leave. Go somewhere no one knows our names. Start over. We. Evelyn smiled then, real and genuine. Yes, we. Because whatever happens, Adrian, we face it together. That's what marriage actually means. He kissed her forehead. I don't deserve you. Probably not, but you're stuck with me anyway. Thomas cleared his throat. For what it's worth, I don't want the duchy. Adrian blinked. What? I don't want it. Thomas's voice was firm. I spent my whole life watching my mother struggle because she was tied to this family. I'm not making the same mistake. Let the title die with you, but the documents will expose the crimes, will ruin the Blackthorn name, but they don't have to transfer power to me. Thomas stood. I just wanted the truth known. I wanted my father acknowledged. The rest, he gestured at the estate. You can keep it or burn it down. I don't care. Celine looked up at him. You're walking away. Yes, and so are you. Thomas extended his hand to her. Come on, we'll figure out what comes next together. After a long moment, Celine took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. The four of them stood there as the sun climbed higher, burning away the shadows. And Adrian realized that everything he'd feared losing, the title, the power, the legacy, had already been irrelevant. What mattered was standing here in the light with people who had seen him at his worst and chosen not to destroy him. That was a kind of power no duchy could match. They were broken. All of them. But maybe, Adrian thought, broken things could still hold together if they chose to. If they were willing to change everything they'd been to become what they needed to be. And as the sun rose over Blackthorn Manor, Adrian Blackthorn made a choice that would have horrified every duke who came before him. He chose to let it all go. And in doing so, he finally became free. The documents hit London like a plague. By noon, every newspaper from Fleet Street to the docks carried the same headline in variations of horror and fascination. The Times called it the Blackthorn Conspiracy. The Morning Post went with murder in the aristocracy. The penny dreadfuls simply screamed Duke of Death in letters so large they could be read from across the street. Adrian watched from the window of a rented room above a tailor's shop in Cheapside, far from Blackthorn Manor, far from the life he'd known. Evelyn stood beside him, her hand gripping his arm so tightly he could feel her pulse through the fabric of his shirt. Below, crowds gathered around newsboys who shouted the details with gleeful abandon. A duke who had covered up murder. A father who had killed his own son. Bribes and conspiracies that reached into the highest levels of government. The story had everything: nobility, death, scandal, and London devoured it like starving dogs tearing into fresh meat. They'll come for you, Evelyn said quietly. Yes. Today. Probably. Adrian turned from the window. Thomas sat at the small table reading through one of the newspapers with an expression that held no triumph, only exhaustion. Celine had left at dawn, disappearing into the city with nothing but a promise to stay away from revenge. Whether she would keep that promise remained to be seen. The door burst open. Adrian's hand went to the knife he'd taken to carrying, but it was only the tailor from downstairs, his face flushed with panic. Your Grace. They're coming. The Crown's men. A whole battalion of them, headed this way. How much time? 10 minutes. Maybe less. The tailor wrung his hands. You need to leave. Now. Through the back? No. Adrian's voice was calm. We stay. Evelyn turned to him. Adrian, we stay, he repeated. Running makes me look guilty, and I'm done running. You covered up a murder, Thomas said flatly. You are guilty. Of conspiracy. Of obstruction. Not of killing Edmund. Adrian met his nephew's eyes. The truth is out now, all of it. If they want to arrest me, fine, but I'm not skulking through alleys like a criminal. I'm a duke. even if it's only for a few more hours. There was something almost funny about that. Here he stood, in a rented room above a tailor's shop, wearing yesterday's clothes, his title about to be stripped away, and still he clung to the identity that had defined him since birth. Old habits died hard, power left marks on the soul that no amount of revelation could erase. But maybe that was the point. Maybe you didn't erase what you'd been. You just chose what to do with it when everything else was taken away. The sound of boots on cobblestones echoed up from the street. Harsh voices, the metallic clank of weapons. "They're here," the tailor whispered, and fled back downstairs. Adrian straightened his coat, smoothed his hair, looked at Evelyn and saw her doing the same, adjusting her dress, lifting her chin, transforming from frightened woman to Duchess in the space of a breath. That ability to become what the moment required, that was what separated aristocracy from everyone else. Not blood, not money. Just the capacity to wear a mask so perfectly you forgot it wasn't your real face. Thomas stood as well, his expression unreadable. The door shattered inward. 6 men in the uniform of the Crown Guard poured into the room, rifles raised. Behind them came a man Adrian recognized, Lord Justice Pemberton, one of the senior magistrates in London. His face was grim, carved from granite and duty. "Adrian Blackthorne," Pemberton said, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to obstruct justice, destruction of evidence, and complicity in the unlawful death of Thomas Ashcroft." Adrian didn't resist as 2 guards grabbed his arms, just met Pemberton's eyes and said, "I understand. Lady Blackthorne, you are also under arrest as an accessory." "She knew nothing," Adrian interrupted sharply. "My wife was kept in ignorance of all my actions. She is innocent." Pemberton's gaze shifted to Evelyn. "Is this true?" Evelyn's jaw tightened. She could lie, could claim ignorance and walk away clean. Adrian saw the calculation in her eyes, saw her weighing survival against loyalty. "No," she said. "It's not true. I knew everything. And I stayed silent." "Evelyn," Adrian started. "Arrest me too," she continued, her voice steady. "I won't let him face this alone." The guards moved toward her. "Wait." Thomas stepped forward. "If you're arresting people who knew the truth and stayed silent, then you need to arrest me as well." Pemberton frowned. "Who are you?" "Thomas Blackthorne, Edmund Blackthorne's son, the man whose father's death you're investigating, and I've known the truth for 2 years, did nothing about it until now." "That's different," Pemberton said. "You had no legal obligation. I had a moral one." Thomas's voice was iron. "If my uncle and his wife are guilty of silence, then so am I. Either arrest all of us or none of us." The room fell silent. Pemberton stared at the 3 of them, Duke, Duchess, and Bastard, standing together in defiance of everything the law required. His face worked through several expressions before settling on something like grudging respect. "Very well," he said finally. "All 3 of you will come. But know this, the Crown is not interested in scapegoats. We want the truth. All of it. And if you cooperate, if you testify honestly about what happened, then perhaps mercy can be found." Adrian laughed. It came out harsh, bitter. "Mercy. You're offering mercy to the man who let a murderer walk free. I'm offering you a chance to make it right." Pemberton's voice softened slightly. "The old Duke is dead. Edmund is dead. Thomas Ashcroft is dead. No amount of punishment will bring them back. But you can ensure their deaths meant something. You can tear down the system that let this happen. That's worth more than rotting in prison." "And what system is that?" Adrian asked. "The one that lets men like you buy justice." Pemberton's eyes blazed. "You think you're the only aristocrat who's bribed a judge, destroyed evidence, covered up a crime? This city is drowning in corruption because men with titles believe themselves above the law. You can help change that. Or you can hang. Your choice." The words hung in the air like smoke. Adrian looked at Evelyn. She nodded once, almost imperceptibly. Then at Thomas, who simply waited. "Fine," Adrian said. "We'll testify. We'll tell you everything. But on one condition." Pemberton's eyebrows rose. "You're in no position to negotiate." "Then call it a request." Adrian's voice hardened. "Immunity for everyone who came forward with evidence, the servants, the witnesses, anyone who helped expose the truth. They don't get punished for doing what's right." Pemberton considered this. Then, Agreed. Anyone who cooperates will be protected. Adrian nodded. Then let's go. Nkiki. The trial began 3 days later in the Old Bailey, and London had never seen anything like it. Every seat in the courtroom was filled. Aristocrats sat beside merchants who sat beside laborers, all of them drawn by the spectacle of watching power be held accountable. The gallery overflowed. People stood in the aisles. Guards had to turn away hundreds more at the doors. Adrian sat in the dock with Evelyn beside him. Thomas sat in the witness gallery, ready to testify. Across the room, the prosecution had assembled a wall of evidence, documents, testimonies, financial records that painted a picture of corruption so deep it had roots in 3 generations of Blackthorn rule. The presiding judge was Lord Chief Justice Harrington, a man known for his ruthlessness and his refusal to bow to political pressure. He looked at Adrian with eyes that had sent dozens of men to the gallows and showed no mercy. The charges were read: conspiracy, obstruction, complicity. Each word fell like a hammer blow. "How do you plead?" Harrington asked. Adrian stood. The courtroom fell silent. "Guilty," he said, "to all charges." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Evelyn's hand found his beneath the table. "And you, Lady Blackthorn?" Evelyn stood as well. "Guilty." The murmur became a roar. Harrington slammed his gavel. "Order." He waited until silence returned. Then, "This court recognizes your pleas. However, before sentencing, the Crown wishes to present additional testimony regarding the circumstances of these crimes." Lord Justice Pemberton. Pemberton rose and called his first witness. Mrs. Holloway, the housekeeper, took the stand. She testified about the morning Edmund died, about the pistol that didn't belong to him, about the fear that had kept her silent for 6 years. Then came the gun dealer who had sold the old Duke his weapon, a weasel of a man who admitted to selling firearms to aristocrats who wanted to keep their hands clean. He described the transaction in detail, the amount paid, the specifications of the revolver, the instructions to ensure it couldn't be traced. Then came servants from Blackthorn Manor, footmen, maids, the cook. One by one, they testified about the atmosphere of fear that had permeated the household, about the old Duke's rage, about Edmund's growing desperation in the weeks before his death. And then Thomas took the stand. He told his story calmly. Growing up in poverty, learning about his father only after his mother died, the anger and confusion that had consumed him, and finally, meeting Evelyn's cousin Celine, who had offered him a chance at revenge. "But revenge isn't justice," Thomas said, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "I thought destroying the Blackthorn name would make me feel whole. But standing here now, watching all of this," he gestured at the chaos, the spectacle, the broken people in the dock, "I just feel tired. My father is still dead. My childhood is still stolen. And tearing down more lives won't change any of that." "What would you have the court do?" Harrington asked. Thomas looked directly at Adrian. "I want the truth recorded. I want my father's name cleared. I want Edmund Blackthorn remembered not as a suicide, but as a victim of his own father's cruelty. And I want the system that enabled all of this to be torn apart piece by piece." He paused. "But I don't want vengeance. I want reform." The courtroom erupted in applause. Harrington's gavel banged repeatedly until order was restored. Finally, it was Adrian's turn to testify. He took the stand and told everything: the duel, the cover-up, the bribes, Edmund's guilt and eventual death, his father's confession on his deathbed, a detail Adrian had kept buried until now. The old Duke, dying of pneumonia, had whispered the truth in his final moments, had told Adrian he'd killed Edmund to save the family honor, had died believing he'd done the right thing. Adrian had carried that knowledge for 4 years, buried it beneath layers of denial and guilt, because facing it meant admitting his entire life had been built on his father's sins. "I should have come forward then," Adrian said, his voice raw. "When my father confessed, I should have told the authorities, faced the consequences. But I was a coward. I chose to protect a dead man's reputation instead of fighting for the truth." "Why?" Harrington asked. "Because I thought that's what being a duke meant." Adrian's laugh was hollow. Sacrifice, duty, protecting the family name above everything else. "I thought suffering in silence was noble, but it wasn't. It was just cowardice wrapped in aristocratic pride." He looked out at the packed courtroom. at the faces watching him with varying degrees of anger, pity, and contempt. My father murdered my brother, Adrian continued. I covered up a killing to protect my father's legacy, and in doing so, I allowed a system of corruption to continue unchecked. I am guilty. Not just of the crimes I'm charged with, but of believing I was above accountability, that my title made me special, that the rules that governed everyone else didn't apply to me. His voice grew stronger, but I was wrong. A title doesn't make you better. It doesn't make you wiser. It just gives you more power to harm people when you make mistakes. And I made so many mistakes, I can't even count them all. He turned to face Harrington directly. I don't ask for mercy. I don't ask for leniency. I ask only that my crimes serve as an example, that the next aristocrat who thinks his blood makes him untouchable remembers what happened here, that the system that enabled my father, that enabled me, is torn down and rebuilt into something that actually serves justice instead of power. The courtroom was silent. Then Evelyn stood in the dock. Your Honor, she said, permission to speak. Harrington nodded. My husband has confessed to crimes that deserve punishment, Evelyn said, but I want this court to understand something. Adrian Blackthorne is not his father. When he learned the truth about Edmund's death, he didn't hide it. He didn't destroy the evidence. He came forward. He chose truth over protection. Her voice shook, but didn't break. Yes, he made terrible choices. Yes, he stayed silent when he should have spoken. But when given the chance to run, to escape, to save himself, he chose to stay. He chose to face this. And that matters. Does it? Harrington asked. When the damage is already done. Yes, Evelyn said fiercely. Because change requires courage, and it takes more courage to stand here and admit you were wrong than it does to maintain a lie until you die. Adrian could have destroyed the documents, could have silenced the witnesses, could have used his power to make all of this disappear. She gestured at the courtroom, at the evidence, at the testimonies. Instead, he helped expose it. He testified against himself. He gave you everything you needed to dismantle the corruption he was part of. That doesn't erase his crimes, but it should mean something. Harrington was quiet for a long moment. The court will recess to consider sentencing, he said finally. We reconvene in 1 hour. They sat in a holding room beneath the courthouse, the three of them together for what might be the last time. Guards stood outside the door. The sounds of the city filtered through the small barred window, life continuing while theirs hung in the balance. I'm sorry, Adrian said to Thomas, for everything. Thomas shook his head. Don't be. You didn't kill my father. You didn't create this mess. You just got caught in it. I could have done more. We all could have. Thomas's smile was sad. That's what makes us human. We make mistakes. We fail people. And then we spend the rest of our lives trying to figure out how to live with that. Evelyn leaned her head against Adrian's shoulder. Whatever happens, she said softly, we face it together. Adrian kissed the top of her head. I don't deserve you. Stop saying that. Her voice was fierce. You're not perfect. Neither am I. But we're here, we're alive, we're fighting. That's what matters. The door opened. A guard stepped in. Court's reconvening. Time to go. They stood. Adrian took Evelyn's hand. Thomas walked beside them. 3 people bound by blood and choice, and the shared understanding that some truths were worth any price. The courtroom was even more packed than before. Word had spread. This was history being made. The day the aristocracy learned it could bleed. Harrington entered. Everyone stood, then sat. The silence was absolute. Adrian Blackthorne, Harrington began. You have pleaded guilty to conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and complicity in covering up the death of Thomas Ashcroft. These are serious crimes that strike at the heart of our legal system. The Crown has presented overwhelming evidence of your guilt. Adrian stood, felt Evelyn stand beside him. However, Harrington continued, the court must also consider the unprecedented cooperation you have provided. Your testimony has exposed corruption at the highest levels. Your willingness to sacrifice your own reputation to ensure justice has been noted. He paused. Therefore, this court sentences you to 5 years imprisonment, suspended pending completion of public service. You will work with the Crown to reform the legal system, to close the loopholes that enabled your crimes, to ensure no other family suffers as the Ashcrofts and Blackthorns have suffered. Adrian's knees nearly gave out. Suspended sentence, public service, not execution, not life imprisonment. Mercy. Actual mercy. Furthermore, Harrington said, your title of Duke of Blackthorn is hereby stripped. Your estates are forfeit to the crown, with the exception of a modest allowance for Lady Blackthorn's maintenance. You will live as a commoner for the remainder of your days. The gavel fell. This court is adjourned. The courtroom erupted. Some cheered, some booed, most simply stared in shock at the unprecedented ruling. Adrian turned to Evelyn and saw tears streaming down her face. We're free, she whispered. We're actually free. Thomas embraced them both. It's over. It's finally over. But it wasn't. Because as they were escorted from the courthouse, as the crowd surged around them with questions and accusations and demands, Adrian saw a figure standing at the edge of the chaos. Cedric Vale. His cousin watched with an expression Adrian couldn't read. Then he nodded once, acknowledgement perhaps, or respect, and disappeared into the crowd. And Adrian knew with sudden, terrible certainty that while this chapter was closed, the story was far from finished, because Cedric had wanted the duchy, had manipulated and schemed and destroyed to get it, and now that title sat vacant, waiting for the crown to decide its fate, waiting for someone ambitious enough to claim it. The crowd pressed in. Questions flew like arrows. Guards struggled to maintain order, and in the chaos, Adrian felt a hand slip a piece of paper into his pocket. He didn't look. Couldn't. But later, in the carriage taking them away from the courthouse, he pulled it out and read. The handwriting was unfamiliar. The message simple. The game isn't over. The crown plans to give the duchy to Cedric unless someone with a stronger claim objects. You have 48 hours. Make them count. No signature. No seal. Just a warning from someone who either wanted to help or destroy him. He couldn't tell which. Adrian looked at Evelyn. At Thomas. At the city rolling past the carriage window. 48 hours to stop Cedric from taking everything the Blackthorns had built. 48 hours to decide if he was done fighting or if he had one last battle left in him. He folded the note carefully and tucked it away. What is it? Evelyn asked. Adrian met her eyes and saw his own exhaustion reflected there. Saw the hope that this might finally be over. Saw the fear that it never would be. Trouble, he said quietly. She took his hand. Then we handle it. Together. Together, Thomas agreed. Adrian nodded. Felt something settle in his chest. Not peace, not quite, but purpose, direction. The understanding that some fights you couldn't walk away from, no matter how tired you were. The carriage turned a corner. Ahead, the sun was setting over London, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. And Adrian Blackthorn, no longer a duke, but not yet sure what he was becoming, prepared for one final war. The 48 hours burned away like paper in a fire. Adrian spent the first day tracking down every connection he still had in London. Men who owed him favors, women who remembered kindnesses, servants who had served the Blackthorn family for generations. Most doors closed in his face. A duke stripped of his title was worse than a commoner. He was a reminder that power was temporary, that fall from grace could happen to anyone, and people feared contagion more than they valued loyalty. But some doors opened. Lord Ashford, Beatrice's husband, received him in a study that smelled of tobacco and old money. The man looked uncomfortable, kept glancing at the door as if expecting someone to walk in and accuse him of treason for harboring a disgraced aristocrat. I can't help you publicly, Ashford said. You understand that. I understand. Adrian sat across from him, no longer the commanding duke, but something harder, something forged in the fire of public humiliation. I'm not asking you to, I just need information. Cedric Vale. What's his play? Ashford poured 2 glasses of whiskey, slid one across the desk. He's been lobbying the House of Lords since your trial ended. Calling in every favor, making promises he probably can't keep. The Crown is considering his petition to assume the Blackthorn Duchy. On what grounds? Lineage. Your father's second cousin was Cedric's grandfather. It's distant, but legally viable. Ashford took a long drink. And with you stripped of the title and no direct heir, the Crown has limited options. They can either give it to Cedric, dissolve the duchy entirely, or, he paused, or what? Or recognize Thomas as Edmund's legitimate son and grant him the title. Adrian's chest tightened. Thomas doesn't want it. What Thomas wants may not matter. Ashford leaned forward. The crown needs this resolved quickly. The scandal has shaken confidence in the entire aristocratic system. If they dissolve the duchy, it sets a precedent that terrifies every titled family in England. If they give it to Cedric, they reward ambition and manipulation. But if they legitimize a bastard son and give him his father's inheritance, he spread his hands. That's revolutionary. That says blood matters more than marriage contracts. That the sins of the father don't damn the son. So Thomas is their best option, if he'll take it. Ashford studied Adrian carefully. Will he? I don't know. Then you'd better find out, because Cedric is making his formal petition tomorrow morning. Once that's filed, the crown will rule within hours. This ends tomorrow, Adrian, one way or another. Tosang. Adrian found Thomas in a boarding house near the Thames, a cramped room with peeling wallpaper and a window that overlooked the gray water. Edmund's son sat at a small desk, writing something by candlelight, and didn't look up when Adrian entered. You should knock, Thomas said mildly. The door was unlocked. That's not the same as being invited in. Thomas set down his pen. What do you want? Adrian closed the door behind him. To ask you a question. Another one. You've asked me dozens over the past 2 days. This one matters. Adrian moved to the window, looking out at the river where ships moved like shadows through the fog. If the crown offers you the duchy, Edmund's title, his estates, everything that should have been his, will you take it? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then, why does it matter to you? Because if you don't, Cedric will. And everything Edmund died for, everything we fought to expose will be for nothing. That's not an answer. Adrian turned to face him. Because you're his son. Because when I look at you, I see my brother. The good parts. The parts that questioned whether any of this, he gestured vaguely at the concept of aristocracy itself, was worth preserving. Edmund hated being a Blackthorn. Hated the expectations, the rules, the endless performance of superiority. He wanted to be free. And you think I should chain myself to the same title that destroyed him? No. Adrian's voice was rough. I think you should take what's yours and remake it into something better. Something Edmund would have wanted. A duchy that actually serves the people instead of exploiting them. A legacy built on justice instead of corruption. Thomas laughed bitterly. You're asking me to save the aristocracy by becoming part of it. That's insane. Maybe. But it's also the only way forward. Adrian sat down across from him. The crown is going to give that title to someone. If it's Cedric, he'll use it to accumulate more power, make more backroom deals, perpetuate the same system that enabled my father. But if it's you, if it's me, I become complicit in that system. Or you change it from within. You can't change rot from the inside. You have to cut it out entirely. Then cut it out. Adrian leaned forward. Take the title. Use the resources. Spend the rest of your life tearing down every corrupt practice, every unjust law, every loophole that lets men like my father commit murder and walk away clean. You have something Cedric will never have. What? Integrity. And the knowledge of what it costs to be powerless. Thomas, you grew up in poverty. You know what it means to be invisible to people like me. If you become a duke, you can actually help the people aristocrats usually ignore. Thomas stared at him. And what do you get out of this? Adrian smiled sadly. Nothing. I'm done. The Blackthorn name is ash. My title is gone. My reputation is destroyed. But you can build something new from the rubble. Something that honors Edmund. Something that makes his death mean more than just tragedy. The candle flickered. Outside, a ship's horn echoed across the water. I'll think about it, Thomas said finally. That's all I ask. Adrian stood to leave, but Thomas's voice stopped him. Did you love him? My father. Adrian turned back. Yes. More than I ever told him. More than he probably knew. Thomas nodded slowly. Then I'll do it. Not for you, not for the crown. But for him, because he deserves to be remembered as more than a mistake. Ichant. The formal hearing took place in Westminster the next morning, in a chamber that had witnessed the rise and fall of dynasties for 800 years. The room was smaller than Adrian expected, more intimate, wood paneling, high windows, a long table where 5 members of the House of Lords sat in judgment. Cedric Vale entered first, dressed in formal attire, his face a mask of respectful solemnity. He bowed to the lords, took his seat, and presented his petition with the smooth confidence of a man who believed victory was assured. He spoke for 20 minutes about his lineage, his service to the crown, his vision for restoring the Blackthorn name to respectability. He promised stability, tradition, a return to the old ways before scandal had tainted everything. The lords listened with neutral expressions. Then Thomas entered. He wore simple clothes, no pretension, no costume, just a young man who had worked for everything he had and owed nothing to anyone. He carried a single document. "My lords," he began, "my name is Thomas Blackthorn. I am the son of Lord Edmund Blackthorn and Catherine Thorne. I was born out of wedlock and raised in poverty because my father died before he could acknowledge me. But I am his son, by blood and by right." He placed the document on the table. It was a letter, yellowed with age, written in Edmund's hand. My father wrote this 3 days before he died. In it, he acknowledges me, names me his heir, expresses his intention to legitimize me and bring me into the family. He never got the chance, but his words are clear. One of the lords, an elderly man with white hair and shrewd eyes, picked up the letter, read it carefully, passed it to his colleagues. "This changes the succession," the lord said finally. "If Edmund Blackthorn intended to legitimize his son, then that claim supersedes distant familial connections." Cedric's face went white. That letter could be a forgery. "It's not." Thomas's voice was steady. "I've had it authenticated by 3 independent experts. The handwriting is Edmund's. The seal is genuine. My father wanted me to have his legacy, and I'm here to claim it." "But you have no experience," Cedric protested. "No training. You're a clerk, for God's sake." "I'm a man who knows what it means to be invisible," Thomas interrupted. "To be ignored by people with power. To watch from the outside while decisions are made that affect your life. And if I become Duke of Blackthorn, I will spend every day remembering what that felt like." He turned to address the lords directly. "I don't want this title because I crave power. I want it because I understand what it costs to be powerless. And I will use every resource it gives me to dismantle the system that let my father die, that let Adrian's father commit murder, that lets men like Lord Vale manipulate and scheme without consequence." The room fell silent. The white-haired lord studied Thomas with an intensity that made the air feel heavy. Then, "You understand that accepting this title means accepting responsibility for the Blackthorn legacy, the good and the terrible." "I do. And you're prepared to face the scrutiny, the judgment, the endless questions about your legitimacy." "I've faced worse." The lord looked at his colleagues. They conferred in whispers Adrian couldn't hear. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Finally, the white-haired lord spoke. "By the authority vested in this body by the crown, we recognize Thomas Blackthorn as the legitimate heir of Edmund Blackthorn. The title of Duke of Blackthorn is hereby restored and granted to Thomas Blackthorn, with all rights, privileges, and responsibilities therein." The gavel fell. Cedric stood abruptly, his face twisted with rage. "This is a travesty." "You're dismissed, Lord Vale," the lord said coldly, "and consider yourself fortunate we're not investigating your role in recent events more thoroughly." Cedric's mouth worked soundlessly. Then he turned and stormed from the chamber, the door slamming behind him with a finality that echoed like thunder. Thomas stood very still, looking at the lords as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. "Your Grace," the white-haired lord said, "you may go." Thomas nodded, bowed, and walked out of the chamber as the newest Duke of Blackthorn. Adrian, who had watched from the back of the room as an observer, felt something unknot in his chest. Relief, pride, and underneath it all, a bone-deep exhaustion that came from finally letting go of something he'd carried too long. Ikim. They met 3 days later at what had once been Blackthorn Manor and was now simply Thomas's home. The new Duke had invited Adrian and Evelyn for tea, a gesture that felt both diplomatic and deeply personal. The manor looked the same gardens, same fountains, same stone walls that had witnessed generations of Blackthorn sins. But something in the air felt different, lighter, maybe, as if the house itself was learning to breathe again. Thomas received them in the drawing room, still looking uncomfortable in his new role, still wearing simple clothes despite the servants' attempts to dress him in finery. "I keep expecting someone to tell me there's been a mistake," he admitted as they sat. That I need to leave before the real Duke arrives. You are the real Duke, Evelyn said gently. I'm a clerk playing dress-up in dead men's clothes. Thomas's smile was strained. But I'm trying. I've already started implementing reforms. New wages for the staff. Transparency in the estate's finances. Open forums where tenants can voice concerns. Edmund would be proud, Adrian said. Thomas looked at him for a long moment. I found something. In my father's old room, hidden behind a loose panel in the wall, he produced a small leather journal, worn and stained, Edmund's diary. From the months before he died. Adrian, you should read it. Adrian took the journal with hands that trembled, opened it to a random page. Edmund's handwriting stared back at him, familiar and heartbreaking. Adrian tries so hard to protect me, to fix what I've broken. But he doesn't understand that some things can't be fixed. Some sins can't be covered up. I killed a man, not in honorable combat, but in a moment of stupid pride and hot anger. And now Adrian is destroying himself trying to save me. I should confess, should face the consequences. But I'm too weak, too afraid, and that cowardice is killing me more surely than any rope ever could. Adrian's vision blurred. He flipped forward, reading faster. I think Father knows. The way he looks at me now, like I'm a problem to be solved rather than a son to be loved. He asked me yesterday what I would do if the authorities came for me. I said I would run. He said that was unacceptable, that a blackthorn faces his fate with dignity. I don't know what he meant by that, but it scared me. Further still, I've decided. I'm going to confess. Tomorrow morning, I'll go to the magistrate and tell the truth about Thomas Ashcroft's death. Adrian will be furious, Father will disown me, but at least I'll be able to sleep again. At least Catherine and our son will know I tried to make it right. The final entry was dated the morning Edmund died. I'm ready. I've written letters, made arrangements. Catherine and the boy will be provided for. Adrian will survive this. He's stronger than he thinks. Father will rage, but that's nothing new. I just hope. The entry ended mid-sentence, because Edmund had never finished it, had never made it to the magistrate, had been murdered by his own father before he could confess. Adrian closed the journal carefully, set it down, pressed his palms against his eyes. He was going to turn himself in, Thomas said quietly. That morning, before your father killed him. Yes. So everything, the guilt, the cover-up, all of it, was for nothing. Edmund had already decided to face justice. Adrian couldn't speak, could barely breathe around the weight crushing his chest. 6 years of guilt. 6 years of believing Edmund's death was his fault for not protecting him better. And all along, Edmund had been braver than any of them. He'd been ready to face the consequences. Their father had stolen that chance, had killed him rather than let him confess, had let Adrian spend years drowning in guilt for a suicide that had never happened. I'm sorry, Thomas said. I thought you should know, but maybe I shouldn't have. No. Adrian's voice was raw. Thank you. For showing me. Evelyn's hand found his, squeezed tight. There's something else, Thomas continued. I want you to help me. With the reforms. The changes I'm trying to make. You know this world better than I do. You understand how it works, where the corruption hides. I need someone I can trust. Adrian looked up at his nephew, at Edmund's son, at the young man who had every reason to hate him but was offering partnership instead. Why, he asked. Why would you trust me? Because you chose truth over comfort. Thomas's voice was steady. You could have let the lie continue, could have destroyed the evidence, silenced the witnesses, maintained the illusion. But you didn't, and that matters. I destroyed lives, broke laws, and then you faced the consequences. That's more than most powerful men ever do. Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then, all right, I'll help. On one condition. What? You let me set up a foundation. In Edmund's name. To support children born outside of marriage. To ensure they have education, opportunity, resources. So what happened to you never happens to anyone else. Thomas's eyes went bright. He'd like that. My father would like that. Then we have a deal. They shook hands. And in that moment, something passed between them that transcended title and legacy. An understanding that redemption wasn't about erasing the past, it was about building something better from the ruins. Duchess. Months passed. London slowly forgot about the scandal as new dramas captured public attention. The Blackthorn name remained tarnished, but Thomas's reforms began to change perceptions. Stories spread about the young duke who paid fair wages, who listened to tenant concerns, who opened his estate's grounds to public use once a month. Adrian and Evelyn moved into a modest house in Bloomsbury, far from the aristocratic circles they'd once inhabited. They lived quietly, simply. Adrian worked with Thomas on legal reforms. Evelyn started a school for girls from poor families, teaching them to read and write and think for themselves. Some nights, Adrian still woke from nightmares, still saw Edmund's face, still heard his father's confession. But Evelyn was always there, holding him until the shadows receded. They weren't the same people who had stood in a bedroom 4 years ago, staring at a silk handkerchief and wondering what it meant. That couple had been strangers performing a marriage. These people, scarred and weathered and marked by everything they'd survived, these people were actually partners. One evening, as autumn turned the London trees gold and crimson, Adrian returned home to find Evelyn in the garden. She stood by the roses, her face tilted toward the fading sun, and for a moment she looked exactly as she had on their wedding day, young and hopeful and unbearably beautiful. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. She smiled. "That handkerchief, the one that started everything. You ever regret it, finding it?" "No, never." Her voice was certain. It broke us open. But that's what we needed. We were dying slowly inside that perfect lie. At least this way, we got to rebuild ourselves into something real. Adrian took her hand. "I love you." "I don't think I ever said that properly." "You've said it." Evelyn turned to face him. "Every day. In 1,000 small ways, that's how I know it's true." They stood together as the sun set over London, over the city that had witnessed their fall and their slow, painful resurrection. And Adrian understood something he hadn't grasped before. Power wasn't about control. It wasn't about titles or wealth or the ability to bend others to your will. Real power was the courage to face your own failures, to admit you were wrong, to rebuild yourself from nothing when everything you'd relied on turned to ash. Real power was choosing love when hate would be easier, choosing honesty when lies would be more comfortable, choosing to keep going when giving up would be a mercy. His father had never learned that, had died believing strength meant domination, that weakness was something to be destroyed rather than understood. But Adrian had learned. Through pain and loss and public humiliation, he'd learned that the strongest thing a person could do was fall completely and then choose to stand back up, not because they had to, because they wanted to. Years later, Adrian received a letter from Celine Ashcroft. She had left London, moved to Cornwall where the sea crashed against cliffs and the wind carried away old ghosts. She'd opened an orphanage, was raising children who had nowhere else to go. The letter was brief, factual. But at the end, she'd written something that made Adrian's throat tight. "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because carrying that hatred was destroying me. My brother is gone. Nothing will bring him back, but I can honor his memory by creating something good from all this pain. I hope you're doing the same." Adrian showed the letter to Evelyn. She read it twice, then handed it back. "Are you," she asked, "creating something good?" He looked around their small house, at the books Evelyn's students had left scattered on the table, at the notes from Thomas about the next reform proposal, at the life they'd built from nothing, humble and honest and infinitely more valuable than anything he'd had as a duke. "Yes," he said. "I think I am." Chutz. The final time Adrian visited Blackthorn Manor, Thomas was hosting a gathering for tenants and their families. Children ran through the gardens that had once been forbidden to anyone without noble blood. Families picnicked on grass that had been manicured for aristocratic eyes only. The house itself stood open, its doors welcoming rather than exclusive. Thomas found Adrian standing by his father's tomb in the family crypt. They'd moved it from the dark underground chamber to a garden plot where sunlight reached it every morning. "Do you come here often?" Thomas asked. "Sometimes." Adrian touched the cold marble. "To remember, and to thank him. Thank him. For making a choice I was too afraid to make. Edmund was going to confess, was going to face justice even though it terrified him. He was braver than I ever gave him credit for. You're brave too. It just took you longer to figure out how." Adrian smiled. Still learning, every day. They stood in silence for a moment. Then Thomas said, I'm legitimizing his relationship with my mother, posthumously, declaring them married in spirit if not in law. It means nothing legally, but it means everything, Adrian finished, to her memory, to your legacy, to the idea that love matters more than propriety. Yes, Edmund would approve. They walked back toward the house together, uncle and nephew, bound by blood and choice, in the shared commitment to building something better than what they'd inherited. At the door, Thomas stopped. Thank you, he said, for everything, for fighting for the truth even when it destroyed you, for helping me become someone my father would be proud of. Adrian clasped his shoulder. Thank you for giving the Blackthorn name a chance at redemption. Inside, music played. Children laughed. Life continued its relentless forward march. And Adrian stepped into it without fear, without regret, knowing that the man he'd become through fire and failure was worth more than the Duke he'd been born to be. But that night, lying in bed with Evelyn beside him, Adrian thought about the silk handkerchief that had started everything. The evidence of betrayal that had turned out to be evidence of something else entirely. A conspiracy. A manipulation. A test he hadn't known he was taking. Somewhere in the city, that handkerchief was ash, burned away with all the other remnants of lives that no longer existed. But the lessons remained. That power was temporary. That reputation was fragile. That the only thing that truly endured was how you treated people when you had nothing left to gain. That love wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing each other again and again, even when, especially when, it would be easier to walk away. That redemption wasn't a destination. It was a practice, a daily choice to be better than you were yesterday, even when yesterday's failures haunted every breath. Evelyn stirred beside him, murmuring in her sleep. Adrian pulled her closer, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, steady and sure and real. This was what he'd been searching for his whole life without knowing it. Not power, not legacy, not the empty performance of nobility. Just this. A woman who knew every ugly truth about him and chose to stay. A nephew who trusted him despite every reason not to. A life built on honesty instead of illusion. And in the darkness, Adrian finally made peace with the ghosts that had chased him for so long. Edmund, who had been braver than anyone knew. His father, who had been broken in ways Adrian was only beginning to understand. Thomas Ashcroft, whose death had set all of this in motion. He couldn't bring them back, couldn't undo the harm, couldn't erase the mistakes, but he could honor them by living differently, by choosing truth over comfort, by building instead of destroying, by being the man he should have been all along. Outside, London slept. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, new chances to fail or succeed. But tonight, Adrian Blackthorn, no longer a duke, just a man, held his wife and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the false peace of ignorance or denial, but the hard-won peace that came from facing your worst self and surviving. From falling as far as you could fall and discovering you could still stand. From learning that sometimes the truth that destroys you is the only thing that can save you. And that love, real love, wasn't about never falling. It was about helping each other get back up. Again and again and again, for as long as it took, for as long as they lived together.